You can join in that conversation. Of course, our Twitter handle will soon be on the screen. It's at NTAGMN. But let's get on with the background. Now, with 12% contribution to the GDP and over 90 million subscribers, Nigeria's telecom market is considered one of the largest and fastest growing telecom markets, not just in Africa, but around the world, attracting considerable foreign investment for further growth. But of course, as the saying goes, there is still very, very much room for improvement, especially as regards internet penetration, customer service, and of course, quality. Timothy Yusuf tells us more in this background report.
The importance of communication in any country, whether developed or developing, is so obvious. In fact, the relationship between the economic development of a country and effective telecommunication services is so interwoven that it is difficult to tell which one comes first. Experts say the development and expansion of telecommunication services in Nigeria is accelerating development across the nation. By implication, both urban and most rural areas now have access to basic telecom services ranging from mobile telephones to internet facilities.
Globally, you cannot develop without IT, ICT. Information communication technology, telecommunication drives every form of development globally. You are talking about space exploration, you're talking about spaceship, you're talking about marine, anything you talk about now that are driven by ICT, IT, telecommunication. So in Nigeria, our major challenge is our regulator.
In everything in this world, it has an advantage and disadvantage. The good ones are using it, to make the lives of the people of their country meaningful. The bad ones are also using it as a kind of scam, to use it to dupe people.
Respondents believe that this development has in no small way contributed towards improving education, health, as well as rapid development of high, small and medium-scale business enterprises, thus leading to the creation of more job opportunities.
We are really vast in those areas as a result of policy that has gotten us there. But there are still some area that we need to checkmate.
Because the telecom industry is an industry that came to revive our economy. If we can handle the remaining part of the economy with this good telecom industry we have, of course, the nation will be better for it.
Telecom is an important part of the infrastructure required for any developed society, and access to information has therefore become very vital to national economic growth and social development. For Nigeria, investigation reveals that transformation of the nation's telecoms landscape increased from 500,000 to over 20 million lines within the first 5 years of telecoms development in the country.
All right, Timothy Yusuf, thank you very much there for that background report. Well, joining us to begin this conversation here in the Abuja studios is the Honorable Minister of Communications, Mr. Abdulrahim Adebayo Shitu. Honorable Minister, it's our pleasure to have you on Good Morning Nigeria.
It's my pleasure of being hosted here this morning.
It appears, Claire, that Adebayo is a recurring name in the persons who have headed the Ministry of Communications. Cornelius Adebayo was in communications, yes, and then we're having Mr. Adebayo Shitu also join us for the conversation this morning. Honorable Minister, it's our pleasure to have you. Communications,
it's my pleasure of being here.
Yeah, it's a broad area now. It's a recent roadmap that you have rolled out called Smart Digital Nigeria. What does this entail, and how is it different from what went on before?
Well, I thank you for having me on this program. Certainly, ICT is the new, is the in thing in all developed worlds. If you look at it, the richest persons in the world today, about the first 2 or 3 richest, are ICT persons. ICT is the only industry where your raw material, the only raw material you need is your brain. It's not the ground, it's not crops, it's not oil, it's not petroleum. Once you can use your brain properly, you are there. Particularly because human beings necessarily by their living want to be innovative, they want to be progressive, they want to use methods which are cost effective. So what we are saying is that Nigeria must be in the League of Developed Nations which are ICT driven. It is interesting that on the African continent, the most ICT driven country today is one of the smallest countries called Rwanda, which had just, come out of war, over the last 10, 12 years ago. Interestingly, everything in Rwanda now is ICT driven. So when you are talking about smart, you are talking of government being social, government being mobile, government being analytic, government being reliable, and government, reliable in the sense of radical openness, and government being trustworthy. What is the sociability in it? The sociability is in the fact that there must be, integration within society. People must be able to link up between government and between government and people. And that brings us to the issue of mobility. How do you socialize? How do you get society socialized? How do you get the interaction which is expected in socialization to take off? The easiest way is through systems that are mobile. And that is where, ICT comes in. With ICT, for instance, I can reach you, 5,000 kilometers away in real time. I can pick my phone and talk to you, and instantly you are listening to me and responding. That is mobility. That is what, the whole idea of being smart is. Again, being analytic in the sense that issues must be knowledge-driven. It does not have to be juju to connect. It must be intelligence. It must be the intellect. It must be exploitation of the brain, of innovation to get things done. For instance, interestingly, just last week, I was in Barcelona at an exposition of ICT. And here was a car on display without, steering wheel, with just buttons, without brake, without anything. It was on display. And that is the cars that would be used in the near future, which would just need to be automated. And then, the owners and the, occupiers of the car perhaps will be in the conference. So these are the issues that are, required. Today in Rwanda, as an example, I get excited because Rwanda is a very poor country. It's consisting of just about 8 million people. It has been war devastated, ravaged by war.
And genocide.
But today in Rwanda, about 4,000 buses, public buses, have Wi-Fi connected, internet connectivity. So when you are on public bus, you can have your laptop and be working and get going. There's no, government payments, either for school fees, for, hospital fees, for whatever, taxes, whatever, that is cash-based.
But Honorable Minister, now that you have talked about the case in Rwanda, let's look at our own case. We know that ICT is a 21st century phenomenon, driving knowledge-based economies. And the most developed nations today, have moved on. They are now knowledge-based. So far, in terms of advancing our knowledge-based economy in Nigeria, how far have we moved?
Well, number one, I believe that we have laid the foundation. Past governments and past ministers of communications have succeeded in laying the foundation. For instance, the GSM that we use now, which can be taken for granted. If you recall that 20 years ago, just 20 years ago, to make a call to UK, you have to leave the comfort of your home, go to United Station, pay some money, line up on the queue, at times for hours on end, before you get a call of maybe 5 minutes, and you pay through your nose. Today, in the comfort of your room, you can pick your handset and call the whole world at little costs and with all the convenience. So that's a very good starting point. Okay. Again, today, in regard to the internet, a lot of things are happening. For instance, most of our universities have now been connected to the internet. The ministry, through some of its agencies, are building internet centers in many of these higher institutions. By the grace of God, with my coming on stream as minister, we will advance this. Again, if you look at what government has recently done, the TSA account is an aspect of advancement in ICT development, because previously, government accounts were not integrated, in the sense that a ministry may have 100 bank accounts without any connectivity, and so it creates leakages in the system such that the minister or the permanent secretary may not even know of the existence of many bank accounts within his ministry.
All right. Honorable Minister, as you very well know, I mean, these are examples that illustrate the uses to which ICT has been put in Nigeria today. But you talked about smart digital Nigeria. What are the high points or the key points in the new roadmap, as it were, following from your experience with your predecessors?
Yes, one of the things
and then, if I may crack this joke, I'm sure where you said there are Wi-Fi services on public buses in Rwanda. I mean, we've seen that in South Africa, for instance, but I've not experienced that in Rwanda. I'm sure somebody in Lagos will be wondering when we'll have Wi-Fi in Molwe, assuming Molwe is yes. All right, so what is the smart digital Nigeria? What are the details?
Now, one of the very key points we have observed is that there's a lot of deficit in ICT infrastructure in Nigeria. There's no broadband penetration in a lot of communities. You still go to a lot of places where in Nigeria, particularly the rural areas, where you cannot access the phone as ubiquitous as we think it is in Nigeria. So we are trying to advance this project to ensure that we encourage both the government itself and private sector participators to try to invest heavily to ensure that broadband covers the entire Nigeria. And that means that, cables have to be laid all over, apart from satellites, which must also be available to ensure that, we as every Nigerian is able to access, telephone and, ICT services. One of the other areas that we are looking at is, what I termed as the smart thing. I've tried to define it. Of course, if we succeed in laying all the infrastructure, it will assist government in growing revenue and, reducing waste. I've given examples of, the banking sector and all of that. You know very well that...
Who is laying the cables? Is it government or private sector?
Government. It is a private sector-led thing, because it is ICT itself is a private... all that government needs to do is to create the enabling environment. For instance, one of the ways we try to encourage this is to ensure that states do not unnecessarily harass, private companies which try to lay cable by the excessive taxes for, the so-called right of way. You find a number of states where even the wards would insist that for, cables to pass through their, corridors, the companies have to pay. We try to ensure that this is made uniform. Effort is still being, on in regard to this. It's not ideally, if government had the resources, government could have assisted in laying all the cables required so that private operators will be leasing, from government, if government is able to do that. But the popular cliche now that says that government has no business in business. Since, the ICT is really a private sector-driven thing. To do that means government will be engaging in business, because monies will have to exchange hands and all of that. And so for us, we try to assist. Of course, in areas where the private sector may not be able to come in, government itself comes in. For instance, we have what we call NICOMSAT. You know, NICOMSAT provides satellite, communication, where private sector people can, rent space for storing their information and for actual telecommunication services also.
Okay, Honorable Minister, thanks for the explanation. But we know that, like you rightly observed and noted, previous administrations have come up with, initiatives in how to develop the sector. But we know that implementation has always been, a challenge, a clog in the wheel. Now, with Smart Digital Nigeria, how are you going to, what are the steps, what are the framework for implementing, considering the fact that most government offices are still analog?
It's a fact. Yeah, well, what we're trying to do, like I said, is in reducing, because the basic problem is with broadband penetration.
So what are your frameworks for implementation?
The framework is to encourage, for instance, we assist in encourage overseas financiers to actually come in to lay. And now we are having companies which are not GSM operators, as it were. But all that they are coming to do is to bring, their cables, lay it all over the country, and rent it out to, operators. I think that, to me, is the key thing that we're trying to do. And I'm happy that one of the companies we are encouraging is an Indian company, which, for instance, wants to lay cables and gas at the same time through the same trunks from Lokoja to Abuja. That's just an example of some of the companies we are trying to encourage. We are doing that all over the place, and in many of my trips, I have been meeting with private financiers and encouraging them to come and invest. Once we can have deep-rooted penetration of broadband all over the country, then most of our problems in the sector would have been solved.
I don't know how much interface your ministry is having with relevant agencies, relevant MDAs, because you're talking now about laying cables, you're having trunk lines, and everybody's been complaining about the fact that, yes, we have mobile phones, but we don't have landlines. On this program, sometime last week, we actually took on urban development. And you can see the chaos in our urban planning. So you lay the cables now, and a governor tells you that we want to construct a road without regard to what lies beneath the earth, and they just excavate it. So what is the interface you are having to be sure that there's no violation, as it were, of this infrastructure?
Now, what we're trying to do really is to use the platform of the Nigerian Governors Forum to appeal to the governors to regard, these cables as part of the critical national infrastructure for Nigeria, which must have, preoccupation, which must have, support and assistance, that these are critical national infrastructure. Whatever is regarded as a critical national infrastructure must be given the, priority of place in whatever is being done. I know that in a few states like Lagos, in fact, in their own master plan, they have already provided for this, so that, we do less of encouraging them because they already appreciate the importance of this. So we are trying to get that message to all states through the Nigerian Governors Forum. Once we succeed in that, I believe that right of way of telecom, penetration and all of that will be taken care of.
Yeah, Honorable Minister, we talk so much about ICT and digitalization. Of course, it's an ICT age. What about NIPOST? What kind of attention is it getting?
I think from my own perspective of the reforms we are bringing into the ICT and the ministry generally, NIPOST is going to benefit the most, and I tell you why. Previously, before any person becomes Postmaster General, he would have been in the service of the NIPOST. He would have attained the position of maybe Deputy Postmaster General or Assistant Postmaster General, and if he becomes the most senior person, he's automatically appointed. Now we are changing that whole scenario. We are seeing NIPOST beyond letter posting. beyond stamp selling, beyond courier, carriage. We are looking at NIPOS as a whole new business, which would, get involved in so many things at the same time. So as a first step, we've advertised the position of Postmaster General to all and sundry. And I can confidently tell you that about 41 people from both within NIPOS and from the business world have applied. They have been shortlisted. They were shortlisted last week, and we are starting the interview. Very, very keen interview to ensure that the brightest and the most innovative person becomes the new Postmaster General. Haven't done that. We are also inviting a lot of business people to bring ideas about how to reposition NIPOS such that we will have a very comprehensive and robust NIPOS this time around. That, what some of the things they will be doing, for instance, would include financial inclusiveness. You would agree with me that today, of the 774 local governments we have in the country, just barely about 50% have bank presence of banks. That means from my little village.
Where is that?
No, I'm just giving an example. Of course, my place, Shaki, Oyo City, is not a village. I'm just giving an example. From your village, perhaps I should say this now. Where there's no bank.
Where's the village?
I'm the one interviewing you.
Where there's no bank, but you are in Abuja, you want to send money monthly to your parents. There's no bank there. To send 10,000 or 5,000 monthly, you have to perhaps go to the garage to look for the vehicle going, transporter going there, or send somebody to take just 5,000 or 10,000.
Precisely.
This time around, we want to ensure that NIPOS, includes in its services financial provision of banking, some form of banking.
All right.
I am told that in South Africa, they have what is called Post Bank. That means that aspect of the NIPOS would involve doing some banking services whereby monies can be transferred. You pay money to a post office here, real time,
It's picked up.
and you would agree with me that there's hardly any village or hamlet
Where you don't have a post.
where you don't have either a post office or a postal agency. Even if it is manned by just one person, there's somebody who is always there.
That's right. That's
So
right.
that is one of the things we're trying to do.
With NIPOS, just a minute, Honorable Minister. One of the key challenges that we have faced as a country is the fact that having street codes or street names and addresses that can be traced, or that you can use satellite to say, look, let's say Google Map, this is the way to go, instead of using refuse dumps, to describe a location XYZ. When are we going to get properly coded? When? What is the timeline for this?
It's going to be this year. I have already sent a memo on this to the Vice President to give us a date when the, coding thing will be inaugurated. A committee had been set up within NIPOS, and they have prepared a report, and it is for the Vice President to launch it. I will assure you that perhaps immediately after the budget, issues, approval, we will get that done. I can assure you that within the next 1 or 2 months, that will be done. We are conscious of the importance, in fact, the critical importance of that, and the ministry has taken very bold steps on that. I can assure you about that.
Honorable Minister, Sir Kingsley, in explaining the smart, digital Nigeria somewhere, you did mention digital, that one of the intentions is to arrive at a digital native Nigeria. Now, does that speak to the local content development? Maybe you want to expatiate on that.
Well, you see, we in developing local content, before even going to the issue of a local content, like in many other areas, Nigeria has been invaded by foreign content in virtually everything, in our film industry, even in our educational, setup, and so on and so forth. So what we are doing now, not trying to do, we've already started doing, is to encourage development of local content by establishing a lot of incubation centers. 2-3 weeks ago, I was in Lagos to visit 2 of such incubation centers, I also announced that we will be starting one in Ibadan and one in Katsina within the next 3 months. After that, perhaps Bayelsa and Plateau and so on, we're taking them 2 by 2, such that there will be a platform for local indigenous people to, have all the infrastructure they need and the encouragement they need to develop local content. Already a number of companies are doing that. For instance, I'm proud to say that TSA, which has become a number one public issue in Nigeria, was developed locally by a Nigerian company. And that has saved Nigeria a lot of money, has blocked all leakages, and today you can confidently say that all monies which government deserves to have are coming in because of the reliability of the system. So we are already working on this. We are collaborating with the private sector to ensure that local content is developed. And I believe that with the encouragement I have been given, because I believe that my job primarily is to advance the cause of ICT industry. I've been going out to meet people in their offices, in their industries, and so on, to give every needed encouragement. And in my press statement also, I've ensured that, look, I am a most accessible person. If you need any support or encouragement, please feel free to come. My doors are always open.
As part of local content development, some commentators have expressed concern that, look, we have millions of telephone handsets, and yet these handsets are not manufactured in Nigeria, or most of the components are not manufactured. Are we going to see a policy shift by which any big company or any small company will be, by policy direction, compelled, as it were, to set up shop in Nigeria to produce?
Yes. Only last week I was with Nokia, executives, international executives, and I told them, and again I was with Huawei sometime in China, and I told them, look, if you can come and establish a manufacturing industry in Nigeria, I would ensure through policy direction that no company is allowed to import already manufactured products into the country.
Okay, that's one leg of it. The second leg, all right, you have something else to
now, we are doing that. You see, these manufacturing processes, like we all know, have a number of factors which determine its success or otherwise. I know that as of today, about 2 or 3 companies are producing locally, cheap phones, which are not popular brands anyway. Now, to be able to fully encourage people to come and establish here, we must get our power situation very right. Let me tell you, a lot of people do complain about GSM companies, particularly in terms of their rates and all of that. And I tell them, look, I am in a position to know today that it costs much more for a company to operate in Nigeria than to operate in other countries where electricity is 24/7. Today, the GSM companies, to maintain one mast whose radius perhaps does not go beyond, say, 40 kilometers, it costs fortune, particularly in maintenance of the generators and in fueling diesel. All of that would be added to it. So while on the one breath we are encouraging, foreign, manufacturers to come and set up shop in Nigeria, we must be sure, we must be able to guarantee that there's enough electricity so that the cost of producing locally is not multiplied.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Honorable Minister, that's the point that you have made. Just to remind our viewers that we've also had on this program, speaking to us from our Lagos Network Center, Chief Eric Umofia, who is involved in tomato paste, tomato puree paste production. And he says that power supply is not his headache. His headache is dumping. In other words, smuggling and dumping. Anyway, well, Honorable Minister, we'll come to, we'll come to some of those.
Honorable Minister, we'll come back, of course. We would like to take a short break now. Of course, just to say that we have other guests that will be joining us in this conversation, but that will be right after this break. Don't go away.
Nigerians. Suicide bombers are not spirits. They are not ghosts. They are human beings like you and me. They live amongst us. They are your neighbors. They are your friends today, but terrorists tomorrow. So you must know your neighbor now. Security begins with you and me. Know your neighbor. Be vigilant. Be security conscious. Report suspicious persons, objects, and movements to the police and other security agencies. The security of our nation is a duty for you and me.
If you see something, say something. Nigeria, unite against terrorism. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Fairy is now in Nigeria, and Fairy is so powerful, even one drop is effective on 100% oily grease. Because Fairy is the best, it removes oily grease easily. Wow, it's squeaky clean. Fairy is the best at removing oily grease.
All right, thank you for joining us once again. We're back to our conversation, and we're talking ICT and, of course, how to develop the communication sector to boost our economy. We have in our conversation Honorable Minister of Communications, Mr. Abdul Rahim Adebayo Shitu, and Kingsley. We'll bring in our guests.
Yes, we have another guest joining us now from our Abuja studios, Mr. Abdul Hakim Ajijola. Is an ICT expert. Mr. Ajijola, we've always had you from time to time. Either here, last time we had you was from KL, that's Kuala Lumpur, RASCAP. So our pleasure to have you on the program
Thank
this morning.
Thank you for the honor of inviting me.
Okay. Okay, just before, I know
we have another guest, yes. We have another guest,
okay.
Yes, who is joining us this time via Skype from the United Kingdom. Is Engineer Ernest Undukwe. Of course, is a very familiar face as a former Executive Vice Chairman, National Communications Commission, NCC. Engineer Undukwe, it's our pleasure to have you on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, Claire.
All right,
yes.
let's quickly ask this question from the Honorable Minister, and it's about the broadband penetration you've talked about earlier on. And I understand that the National Broadband Policy, of course, aims at that, but to the rural dweller, to the farmer, for instance, who has great need of ICT, does that speak to him in terms of access?
Well, the truth, the reality is that today there's deficiency in broadband penetration, and it is the duty of government in collaboration, with the private sector, to ensure that the farmer, the rural dwellers have as much of equal access as that, but that takes time. Remember, we started about 16, 17 years ago. We are still making progress, I believe, and what government is doing the utmost to ensure that that is done. One of the things we are also doing, if I may say, is that even secondary schools are being provided with access, in terms of internet centers. I am confident, and I can say this with authority, that this year alone, a minimum of 4 such, internet access schools would be provided with all that it requires. And government is going to spend about 50 million on each of such, facilities.
That's coming through the USPF scheme or something?
Through the USPF scheme.
Yes.
That is being done, a minimum of 4 in each state. And once that is concluded, and that is, coming from the budget 2015, the remainder of funds for budget 2015.
Carryover.
As soon as the carryover, if you like, as soon as the new budget is approved, I can assure you that, we will give approval for minimum of such. And these will be rural schools, not necessarily, urban schools.
All right, Honorable Minister, just before we take comments from the 2 guests, Undukwe in the UK and Ajijola here with us in the Abuja studios, that's a point that is also worrisome to some commentators. Yeah, we keep talking about creating jobs, local content. There was a time when Zynox computers, was a must-have in various offices. Now, if you take a look at aspects of the 2016 budget, whether at the federal or at the state levels, you find provisions for the purchase of computers. People are wondering, how many of those computers are being sourced either from Zynox or Omatech? I'm sure you know Mr. Seriki very well. And others who also produce computers, because if they are not producing, of course, they can't create jobs.
Well, I think there were challenges in the past. Yes. These challenges have been addressed. Part of the challenges, again, is I don't want to, apportion blames now. The budgeting processes are beyond us, beyond our ministry. I mean, you have a ministry which perhaps wants to spend maybe 1 billion naira or 500 million naira on a purchase of laptops or whatever. And it is, they decide where they source these, from. So, but what I can assure you is that I've met with Zynox on 2 or 3 occasions. I've also met with Mrs. Seriki, Omatech, on a number of occasions. And if you ask them, they will tell you that the greatest encouragement that they can ever have, they are getting it from me. And I can assure you that we will do the utmost to ensure that these local, manufacturers are appropriately patronized.
All right, Honourable Minister, thank you. Let's now bring in 2 other guests into our conversation. Of course, we'll join the former Vice Chairman, National Communications Commission, NCC, Engineer Ernest Ndukwe. Of course, Mr. Jijola here has been very patient. We'll still get back to you. Mr. Ndukwe, I know that, correct me if I'm wrong, you were a member of the committee that probably looked into, a roadmap that, of course, came up with a national broadband policy in the past. Now, what do you think has been the challenge implementing, a roadmap, for the communications sector, especially as regards to the broadband, issue?
Thank you very much. First of all, if you permit me, let me congratulate the Honorable Minister for his intervention so far in this program. It's almost as if he's been the minister for a very long time, especially on his interventions with respect to the tower situations in the country, the changes he's trying to bring to bear in NIPOST, and then the issue about some of the things that are delaying some implementation, which is perhaps the reluctance of some state governments to give the required right of way to make sure that optic fiber cable get installed across the nooks and crannies of this country. And that starts with actually the understanding of the importance of broadband and ICT to our national development. It was instructive when I was listening to the Honorable Minister. He talked about Rwanda. The biggest champion for the ICT revolution in Rwanda has been the President Kagame himself. He piloted the country and made sure that all the policies that are required are put in place. And that's why he's always called upon in the International Telecom Union. In fact, he's part of the UN Broadband Expansion Committee and all that. So if you ask me what is actually delaying the implementation, I think the implementation has been going on, but quite honestly, the issue about right of way to enable optic fiber infrastructure to be installed all over, including also the metropolitan fiber networks. And I would really encourage that our policymakers look into this thing and demonstrate a good understanding of the importance of ICT to the development of their citizens, and therefore look at making money at the back end, not necessarily at the front end, where all kinds of taxes, in fact, in some states, you have up to 3 or 4 government agencies pursuing the same telecom company for all kinds of charges for right of way. Once we understand the importance of this vital infrastructure, we will even provide the right of way required, because nobody asking you to pay them money to build these things. They're actually ready to invest billions of dollars into building the infrastructure. And let the infrastructure be on ground, then we all can reap the benefits, which will include the governments that will gain on taxation from the companies that are doing these things. But charging them upfront for right of way in a very massive manner makes the whole case very difficult.
Okay, well, Engineer Odukwe, thank you very much there for your response to our initial question to you. We'll come back to you in the course of the remainder of the conversation. But let's return now to our Abuja studios. Mr. Ajijola, you've listened to both the Honorable Minister and to Engineer Odukwe. I mean, it's almost like what the Minister says, smart digital Nigeria, and what is required to be done, like you're building a beautiful edifice, but you also have to be concerned about security. No mention has been made of the question of security. Where should cybersecurity, what should be the place of cybersecurity in the roadmap for our communications subsector?
Well, thank you very much. It's very difficult speaking after two knowledgeable and good speakers. I will say that it's more than simply cybersecurity. It's actually about protection of our critical national assets, of which critical national infrastructure or national information infrastructure is a component. Now, having said that, for example, we have a lot of bridges in Nigeria. Many of these bridges actually carry the fiber cable across. So once that bridge is not well maintained and it has a problem, now this is not a Ministry of Communication issue, but it's now what I would call the Ministry of Infrastructure, which is the big ministry. Once that bridge has a problem, let's say it collapses, anywhere beyond that bridge is cut off from connectivity. Now, yes, you could use satellite as a backup, but it is quite an expensive backup. So in terms of the cybersecurity, you could build this broadband, and let us use the analogy of a road. But if that road is not safe, there was a point in time, I believe, the Lagos-Ibadan road had security issues. Most people would prefer now to go through Ogun State, through Abeokuta. So you're going to have the same kind of problems. If the core networks are not safe, nobody's going to put their business on it. Now, one critical thing I think we have to look at, and many of us that design these policies and ideas, and I'm so happy the minister is here. He mentioned, for example, the TSA. TSA, the underlying software was developed by a Nigerian company. Beautiful, wonderful. But now it is the same Nigeria, through our National Assembly, that basically is now castigating the company that built this as overcharging. Frankly, as a business, if I charge you 10 kobo and you pay, it is for you to negotiate whether it's actually 10 kobo or 5 kobo. So I think the negative publicity that has been given to the company that developed the underlying TSA software system is not good for indigenous development. So I think this is an issue I would want the minister to, as a politician now, to really engage with his colleagues in the National Assembly that, listen, while it is true that we should moderate charges, I think going to town on budding local developers in the way they have is not necessarily as constructive to development of local content. So the whole set of issues. I would also like to just quickly mention that the local telecoms companies have started developing local app stores. This is good for intellectual property. This is good for developing local content. However, there is a very strong feeling amongst many of us that these companies are not necessarily treating the local developers fairly. And again, I think that issue of the perception that the local app stores are ripping off local developers really needs to be looked into by the policy bodies of the Ministry of Communication. So.
No, Claire, well, I thought you would speak more to, I talked about the security.
Yes.
Well, I use cyber security broadly
yes.
To incorporate, as you said now, security of public communication infrastructure.
Correct.
What concerns should we have about, cyber attacks? I mean, I know, perhaps I mentioned this once. I mean, you go to some advanced countries and you find them engaging in cyber warfare, on the system, and you have
software piracy.
Yeah, you have remote locations
which
where
is the App Store's issue.
that's right. You have remote locations where all of this is monitored, and I'm sure you've heard. I mean, we have all heard of various, viruses being unleashed. I mean, the TSA or any other system can be attacked, by vicious persons. What is the backbone for protecting this, and how should this feature, for instance, in the framework that the minister has outlined?
Well, for example, I would encourage the minister and the ministry to look at how to encourage, again, your local developers, your local developer community to be able to form their own businesses that provide cybersecurity solutions. And the reason is that the general tendency is for government to say, oh, we can do it. But the truth of the matter is that the government is not always at the cutting edge. So you have to look at how can we turn around the cybersecurity problem into a cybersecurity, I don't want to say solution, but a positive. Again, I use the example, as I've used before, of Israel. They have some national security challenges, and they have used those problems to develop basically a national security industry. And I would encourage Nigeria to look similarly. Very quickly, you have cybercrime accounts for about 0.8% of our GDP. This is almost 90 billion naira a year that is being lost, equivalent to the cement sector. Two, you have about 97, I believe you mentioned, over 90 million Nigerians. Kaspersky, in their own survey, has found out that out of every 2 people in Nigeria, 1 of them has been attacked in some way or form in the last year. So we're 4 of us sitting around this table. It means 2 of us have been attacked. It's that serious. Finally, and this I think is good for the minister to also appreciate, the African, don't think Nigerian, think African. The African cybersecurity market as of 2015 was valued at about $1 billion. By 2020, that market will be about $2.5 billion. And my question to myself and the rest of the young people in Nigeria who are thinking of getting into IT, and definitely to the minister himself, is how does Nigeria get a piece of that action?
Okay, just before the minister probably answers that question, Honorable Minister, Mr. Jijola here had talked about the safety of the core networks. Earlier you mentioned, power generation, of course, which Kinsley, of course, responded to. But these are obviously infrastructure challenges that inhibit investors, from actually investing outside the urban centers. The urban centers are where, of course, they can make their profit, but extending, beyond that is a challenge. Now, a roadmap that is silent on these issues, certainly.
Well, you talk of Nigeria. When you talk of Nigeria, you are not talking of the urban areas alone. I mean, there's a connectivity. I mean, and that is why, for instance, when post offices are built, if you build post offices and you build them only in, I'm just giving that as an example, in urban areas, it means that, those in other places will be cut off. What we're trying to do with the post office system about the financial inclusiveness is, towards the same goal. So I want to also see Nigeria as one whole, where government must do the utmost to ensure that all citizens are catered for. And of course, the GSM companies must also do the utmost to ensure that, the whole country is covered.
Okay. Well, Minister, we'll come back to you. Let's return to Engineer Ndukwe, who's joined us via Skype from the UK. Engineer Ndukwe, it's nearly 15 years since we had the first GSM rollout. There were teething problems at the time, and Nigerians who understand, those who were customers and who are still customers who understand that, yes, there were problems that they needed to cope with. But as I said, 15 years on, it would appear that customer satisfaction is not any higher than it had ever been. I mean, you have the major challenge of nuisance text messages, drop calls, and all kinds of, customers complain, fraudulent charges. What do we need to do?
Thank you very much. I think the thing to note about telecom services is actually the fact that infrastructure is critical. As Nigeria expands, you need a lot of infrastructure, both terrestrial and otherwise. It has been mentioned earlier in this program that we have a shortfall of infrastructure in Nigeria. And for instance, when you talk about towers, in the UK alone, you have over 50,000 towers in a small island. When you compare that to Nigeria, we have just over 20,000 towers. And that is because to install towers in Nigeria, you need to go through all kinds of hurdles. Permission for space, permission for ground to install it and all that. And GSM is a terrestrial infrastructure. It's not based on satellite. Satellite cannot do it. It hasn't been done anywhere else in the world. So you need towers, you need to install antennas in critical places. And when you have congestion in a particular area, you need to go there and put a second or a third tower there in order to ease this congestion. If it becomes difficult to install those things, then there is a problem. Let me also say that for the operating companies, they need to do more. They need to invest much more in building out this infrastructure. But one area that I would like to see a major improvement on is in building of what is called metro fiber infrastructure. Because today, we're still talking about voice infrastructure. But quite honestly, what is important and more important today is broadband infrastructure. Because voice can actually be integrated into data. And when you have that capacity, then a lot more can happen. This call that I'm making from a very remote location is made possible by a broadband channel. And that is why it is important that you have good broadband infrastructure, and fiber infrastructure is so critical to making it happen. And so when we talk about ensuring that we have right of way, that is also part of that gospel that we are trying to preach, to make sure that every one of us is conscious of the role we have to play. In the broadband plan, we actually articulated the roles of everyone, role of the operators, roles of the policymakers in government, role of the regulator, because all those three must work in sync in order to make a meaningful impact in our telecommunications infrastructure. And when you have a good infrastructure, then many of these problems we're talking about, drop call is actually because there is too much congestion in the place. If, for instance, there are too many people using the same network, then there's going to be a drop call. It's like many people forcing themselves into a bus. I don't want to say that one passenger will have to drop off in order for the rest of the passengers to be able to go on the journey. It's the same thing with telecommunications. Every telecom tower has its own capacity. And so if there is too much congestion in a particular tower, then you have places where you have drop-off. And the drop calls also happen, for instance, if you're driving and you're moving from one cell to another cell. If the handover is not smooth between one, because that's why they are called cellular networks. You actually, as you're driving, for instance, in Lagos, if you're going from Lagos Island to Lagos mainland, you'll be surprised how many changes of cells that would have happened by the time you move from Ikoyi to the international airport. And all these things have to be seamless. And there must be tower infrastructure in all those places along the way. Otherwise, there'll be a drop call. So there's need for more infrastructure, and that's why the message must be for the operating companies to do more in terms of making sure that they install more infrastructure, invest much more, because the networks are growing. At the beginning of the program, I had about 90 million, but actually today, the number of lines, connections, let me use, not necessarily discrete individuals. The number of connections is over 140 million subscribers in the network, and it's still growing. And so we need to that number with the required infrastructure. And every chain is as weak as its weakest link. And that's why today in Nigeria, one thing that is critical is fiber to the base station. It's so critical for broadband, because 3G network is broadband, 4G network is broadband. So we need fiber to the base stations, and that is critical for today's network in Nigeria. And all hands must be on deck. I keep repeating that. Government, operating companies, the regulator, all hands must be on deck to make sure that we have the networks of our dream. And that is very important for us to improve quality of service. Apart from the fact that some of the operators also misbehave, they do some promotions when they don't have the capacity that is required for the number of lines that will come on stream. Because once you're promoting your network, many more people will be on the network. And when you don't have the infrastructure capacity to be able to carry it, then you have a problem.
Engineer Ernest Ndukwe, we would like to thank you. Actually, our signals connection is breaking, so we'd just like to appreciate your contributions just before we lose you completely. Engineer Ernest Ndukwe, former Vice Chairman, National Communications Commission, NCC, joining us via Skype from the US. We thank you very much, sir. From the UK, I beg your pardon. All right, and back here, Kingsley. I just quickly like to ask Mr. Ajijola, how can we improve penetration? You listened to Engineer Ernest, and of course you saw the connection breaking there. Yes. Even right here, we're finding it, difficult to even access the internet. So how can we boost penetration?
Well, I think as both the minister and Dr. Ndukwe have indicated, it is bottom line investments. And this is where I think, again, they've already said it, but really, as a country, and particularly our political class, we have to learn to basically tax after the pie has been baked, not before, not to necessarily tax the ingredients. And, the Almighty works in mysterious ways. The previous minister, I think, did a yeoman's or your lady's job as a technocrat. And I think this was very important and very necessary. And I must give her those kudos. And today, we have somebody who is a politician. And why that is actually very interesting is because one of the issues that the technocrat was unable to really overcome was how to engage with the political class to really talk in their language to say, listen, this right-of-way business, as a classic example, the way you are going about it is not constructive. And I would continue to urge the minister, because frankly, very bluntly, sir, Oyo State is actually one of the states where the right-of-way charges are quite high nationally. So that I would urge the minister, yes, you need to work with the Governors Forum, but please, sir, with all due respect, try and engage individual governors and work with them to get them as one politician to another to see that you can have a bigger pie if you allow the payback to be a little later. Another issue that, if you would bear with me, that I would love to bring up, one of the big challenges we have in this country is duplication. There are infrastructures that we are building twice. Different government agencies are building such infrastructure twice. And a very classic example which has struck me recently is the issue of fingerprints, biometrics. NIMSIC has collected my biometrics. Immigration has collected my biometrics. Road safety has my biometrics. Financial Reporting Council now wants my biometrics. And I'm very worried because once my biometrics are compromised, sir, then how do I reset my fingerprints?
All right, yeah.
That's the cybersecurity angle.
Thank you. I think we'd like to take tweets now. We have quite a number of them coming. Kingsley.
Well, that's right. We have one here. It says, my area, that's the Twitter handle. A Canada-based Nigerian citizen has developed an A-language preservation software. That's the information that is put across there. And then he also says in another tweet that the issue of broadband integration still boils down to federal government inclusiveness. Broadband in Nigeria is ripping people off.
All right, and this one, Kingsley, says is from Abiola Ogundeko, and he tweets, Wilson and Clara. I guess he meant Kingsley and Claire. All right, that's Kingsley and Claire. Please, what Nicomsat and Galaxy Backbone are doing on threats to national ICT infrastructure and cyber security. And he also tweets, Kingsley, I wish the Honorable Minister of Communications, Barrister Adebayo Shito, to look into the telecoms operators on broadband.
And Ibrahim Tudu says communication should be at the center of the nation's fight against insecurity and corruption. How does your ministry fare on this? Now, these are some of the tweets that we have in the meantime. We'll take some others in the course of the conversation. We're climbing now to the hour mark. But just before, Claire, we'll take some other tweets. I would like the Honorable Minister to respond to this because the question has been out on the social media for quite a while now. And this has to do with the fine that was imposed last year by the NCC on MTN. There are reports that the MTN may have reached an arrangement with the Ministry of Communications rather than with the NCC, and they are said to have paid some 50 billion naira as an indication of good faith, in seeing through the arrangements that have been made. Honorable Minister, what is the situation and what is the role of NCC?
Whatever I say with regard to that are sourced from very, very informal communication with executives of MTN. I am told we never had any formal negotiation because it was Mr. President who actually took action on remission of part of the fine. And then, instead of paying, that was in December, they went to court apparently to buy time, because they knew that if they didn't pay by the 31st of December, they would have been shut down. So to save themselves from the hangman's noose, they rushed to court, to give themselves some break. And at the same time, started making overtures for out-of-court settlement. I am told by MTN officials, because I was away over the last 1 week, that they met with the Attorney General, who asked them to pay some money as, an advance payment, as it were, and then to withdraw the case from court. I am told that they have done that by, number one, withdrawing the case from court, number two, making some down payment of 50 billion for the purpose of creating an enabling environment for out-of-court settlement. Okay. The matter has not been finalized. Okay. The issue as to how much they would pay more, I think, will be decided by government on the appeals that they are still making. So I am saying all of this not on official authority. This is what officials of MTN told me, far away in Spain over, the last 1 week. I'll be resuming in office today, and I hope that I will have official communication as to what has been done. So I want to re-emphasize that no negotiations took place between me or my ministry and MTN. Okay. No such thing.
All right, Honourable Minister, that's clear. But I'd like to come back again to Mr. Ajijola. Earlier on, you raised the issues or concerns about collection of multiple collection of your biometrics and how, of course, it affects security.
Well, again, the bottom line is that really you have an organization, NIMSI, which is charged by law not only to collect this kind of thing, but also to regulate it. And what you are finding is that other government entities in particular are simply duplicating the effort, which means that one, they are building duplicate infrastructure. Two, you cannot, they are training duplicate people in certain specialized areas, but you cannot guarantee the safety and security. Today in Nigeria, Galaxy, Main One, I believe, have the ISO certification. I don't know if the other agencies do. And the bottom line is that if somebody is able to take my identity, I mean, it's mine, it belongs to me, willy-nilly, and basically replace my fingerprints with theirs, then anywhere that I want to access with my fingerprints, I can no longer access. But if I may, I just want to also touch on something Kingsley had mentioned about the cyberspace and cybercrime and cybersecurity. We have to appreciate that cyberspace is now a venue for terrorists and terrorism. And cyberspace is used as a tool, it is used as a medium, and it is also a target of cyber terrorists. So the more we build these infrastructures, definitely the more we have to be worried about their safety and security. Again, going back to part of the way terrorists work is to assume somebody else's identity. There is also a fundamental issue of money in all of this. And I don't mean money in terms of contracts, but the nature of what is currency. Our ancestors used cowries. Maybe our colonial masters used gold. We are using pieces of paper called notes, and we're also using these plastic things, ATM cards, for example. But money of the future is going to be electronic. Money of the future is going to be the cryptocurrencies. And the fundamental pillar of cryptocurrency is actually authentication, who you are.
That's right.
And if those kinds of things, because different government agencies willy-nilly are collecting this kind of information, then they will undermine our capacity as a nation to evolve into this age of new currencies. So I would want government really to enforce, because don't forget, even President Buhari has asked many of these agencies not to be collecting these kind
biometrics.
Multiple biometrics. So the Attorney General has mentioned it, Secretary to Government, so all these people have issued instructions. And I don't see why government agencies should flout their superiors in the first place. But really, they don't understand the kind of underlying national security threat that they may cause in the future. They are laying a foundation for problems.
Mr. Ajijola, obviously what you're speaking to could, if the minister accepts it, form part of Smart Digital Nigeria. As part of the framework that has to be utilized. An illustration, one of the network services sent out messages, come and re-register your SIM. I got a message, I went in there, and what they were asking for, I said to myself, look, yes, I went through the process. You could have gotten this from NIMC. I have my national ID card. And you could have got it from FROSC or anywhere else, so why did I have to come here? Just send me a text message. If you needed my ID card number, I just give it to you, and then you go and get that. Honourable Minister, we were pressed for time now. Spectrum allocation has always been a major challenge. Are we likely to overcome it this time around?
Well, there would continue to be competition. Yes. I can assure you about that, because the spectrum really is a wealth that companies rely on, particularly telecommunication companies, for them to be able to transmit. As a minister, some companies had been licensed to operate landlines. Unfortunately, many of them are folding up. I mean, certainly that is not the fault of government. It looks to me, I may be wrong, it looks to me that Nigerians are in love with GSM, and so they are going for it. I also want to believe that GSM is maybe cheaper than landlines. For whatever reason, it is unfortunate that landline operators are, packing up. Maybe we have to look into why that is being done, particularly if we have these operators coming forward to make complaints.
All right, Honorable Minister of Communications, Mr. Abdul Rahim Adebayo Shittu, many thanks to you for joining our conversation. We also like to appreciate Mr. Abdul Hakim Ajijola, an expert on ICT. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And Engineer Ernest Ndukwe, former Vice Chairman, National Communications Commission, NCC, joined us via Skype from the UK. We'll also like to appreciate your contributions. Thank you very much, sir.
Very much.
Okay, it's Good Morning Nigeria. We're going on to our companion.
2004 remain in third place, 5 points adrift of leaders Leicester City, having now played the same number of matches. The Red Devils moved back into 5th position with their first win in 3 Premier League games. Also on Sunday, Tottenham came from behind to beat Swansea City 2-1. And that's a quick one from the world of sports. Do enjoy the rest of the program.
And we have just enough time for the weather forecast for the rest of the day.
Consistent accumulations of moisture over the south as a result of the southwesterly wind flows into the country, keeping the coast and the inland cities in cloudy conditions. And areas around Lokoja and Makurdi will be partly cloudy, and the north is expected to still remain sunny and hazy during the morning hours. And as the day progresses into the afternoon and evening hours, the weather conditions over the north is still expected to remain the same, while the cloudiness over the south is expected to give rise to localized showers around the eastern flank of the south, and prospects of localized thunderstorms are not unlikely over the western part of the south. And for temperatures across the cities in Nigeria, let's take a look. From the Nigerian Meteorological Agency, bye for now.
And that will be all for Good Morning Nigeria for today. We thank you for watching, and do join us again same time tomorrow. I am Claire Adelabu Abdulrazak.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo, thanking you for starting your day with us. As Claire says, we're back tomorrow 7 o'clock in the morning. Have a nice day.